Welcome to the Product Quest podcast. Thanks for joining us on our journey to better understand innovation and product strategy. My name is Scott Burleson, and joining me as always, my co-hosts Jan Vermouth and Jonathan Edwards. Today we welcome our very special guest, Mr. Dan Adams. Dan is the founder and president of the AIM Institute and is author of New Product Blueprinting, the handbook for B2B growth. He's a chemical engineer by training and the holder of many patents, including a listing in the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Dan is a teacher to thousands of innovation practitioners, has coached hundreds, if not thousands, of innovation projects, and is the chief architect of Blueprinter software, the tool that helps novice voice of customer practitioners to become effective as experts and helps experts to become as effective as masters. I should add that I work for Dan, and most importantly, he's my friend. Dan Adams, welcome to the Product Quest podcast.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And by the way, that was a very nice introduction. Did I ever mention how Mark Twain was introduced?
Please tell me.
This next speaker has never been in jail, and I don't know why. So thank you. That was very kind, I thought.
Thanks, Chip. You know, of course, we're going to get into new product blueprinting, all the exciting stuff that you're doing now. But let's go back a little bit first to your early years as an engineer. What about those experiences really sticks with you?
Yeah, you know, it takes a while, at least for me, to figure out what I really enjoy doing. And what I found was when I was working on product development, that's what really floated my boat. When we could figure out what customers wanted, go in the lab. Even when I was in marketing, Scott, I used to roll up in my lab coat some safety goggles, and I would go every Friday over to the lab, and I had a good buddy over there, and I would schedule a technical breakthrough, a little bit of a standing joke every Friday afternoon, you know. And one day we actually did it. I told people later we used the J. Paul Getty formula of success: rise early, work hard, strike oil. In other words, just dumb luck, you know. And but then we got that product rolling, and we launched it 10 months later. Market loved it. I thought, this is what I really enjoy doing. And then later in my career, I started coaching a lot of other teams. And I thought to myself, I like this even better. It's one thing to do it myself, but to be able to coach teams and help them do it, man, that was exciting. So that was kind of my journey in this whole new product development area.
That was a big moment. Is the product still in the market?
It has ended, yes, it is. And it ended up selling tens of millions of dollars. It was highly, highly successful. And so that's when it kind of taught me, it all starts with the customer needs. We did understand what the customers wanted, and we just kept working at that until we figured out how to solve it.
Well, the Akron area, Ohio, where you live, is traditionally known for chemical and rubber manufacturing. How do you think that environment shaped your career or yourself individually, or did it?
Yeah, it did actually. Yeah, I worked for a company called BF Goodrich Chemicals, and very much into polymers. And, you know, that doesn't sound maybe too exciting now, but I'm pretty old. So at the time, that was a little bit cutting edge, you know. And so we were able to do some things that hadn't been done before. You know, also, and some of our listeners may find yourself in this boat. If you ever find yourself where you have a leading product in the marketplace, I think a good mental picture is, hey, we are at the tip of the sword here, you know, and that means that there may be some really cool things we can do that haven't been done before. And I was fortunate enough to work in one of those product areas where we were the world leader. It was a water-based thickener, and you know, that mental approach is like, hey, if it hasn't been done, it's probably because we haven't done it. So let's see what we can do. It can be quite exciting.
Hmm. Well, you've taught lots and lots of students now, probably more than most college professors. What would you say are some of the keys of teaching adults, and how, if any, is that how at all is that different than teaching, you know, children, younger people?
Oh, yes. So teaching adults, teaching B2B engineers and chemists and marketing people. You mean the people who are already overworked, Scott, that don't have any time, that can barely keep up with their email, and their boss says to them, hey, you need to go learn this, and nothing is taken off their plate. Those the ones you mean?
The ones, right.
Yeah. So, you know, I guess a couple principles. You know, the first one is, let's figure out, do they need knowledge or skills? And as you know, when we work with clients, it's skills, right? I mean, how to do good voice of customer and so forth. And if it's just knowledge, you might be able to get some e-learning and some books, and they might be able to pick it up. But if it's skills, they're going to have to get their hands dirty, no doubt. So that would be the first principle. The second thing is they really are overworked. So you got to figure out a way to not make this extra work. So as you know, in our practice, what that means is we say, what new product development project would you have worked on anyway? And let's go ahead and let's wrap these new skills around so you can do this project even better. So it took us, 15 of our 17 years, I think, right, to break the code. But now what we do is we start with a couple half-day workshops and get them started. And then we surround them with e-learning, with tools, with the knowledge center you built, Scott. But most importantly, we assign a dedicated AIM coach to them. And then they kind of hold their hands. We used to have coaches just drop in every now and then, and they would catch the team after they made a mistake. But we've learned it's a little bit better to have the coach there and catch them before they make the mistake. So I think that's probably it, have them work hands-on, real projects, surround them with especially coaching skills.
Well, the big thing I heard there is just going from knowledge to skills. And so just you alluded to some of that. It sounds like part of that is getting started actually working on something real. Is that right?
It is. It absolutely is getting started working on. The other thing that comes in here is I'm thinking about it a little bit. When you have somebody that you would like to learn new material, really there's two things. If I'm the learner, my two questions are, why should I learn this? And the second one is, how do I do this? And so we've also learned if you jump in on the how and you don't convince them of the why, you're really not going to get them. So when we start with those 2 half-day workshops, we're putting a lot, and we're putting a lot into the why. Now, sometimes you get a few people like they already know why, and they're like, come on, give me the how. But we can't leave behind the people who haven't figured out the why yet, because we'll never get them again. So you start with that, you win them over, and then you dive into the how. And then it's, again, a lot of skills, let them try it. They saw you do it and they thought they knew how, then they tried it themselves and they realized they didn't. So now they have to work at it some more.
Yeah, I want to come back around to blueprinting, but first, something that a lot of people probably don't know, I certainly do. You wrote a book on parenting called The Child Influencers, Restoring the Lost Art of Parenting, which we use in my house. We were referencing this week, by the way. Is there anything in the content or the approaches when you put that book together that relates to the innovation process or that you use today?
Oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't really linked those together. We actually homeschooled all of our children. And so, probably unbeknownst to me until a clever podcast, interrogator asked me, we probably did bring a lot of those principles into our business because a lot of it, we actually developed, when I was doing this with the kids, we actually developed 300 activities to do with them. So it was very much hands-on learning. In fact, I just did one of them in the basement with we have 10 grandkids. And you may want to try this one, Scott. Tell your wife it's called dust explosion, okay? You put some cornstarch in the end of the straw and you blow it into a flame and it blows up. It's really cool. No, it's not that bad, but it's really fun. But I guess coming back to your original question, I think it's the hands-on learning that, we did a lot as parents that we realized that probably stays with us as we become adults as well. You need to learn things hands-on.
I thought the lesson was we needed to bring fire and explosion.
I was jumping in this.
That too.
Wow, 300. Yeah, that certainly makes sense. I'll mention one of so we homeschool our children as well. You did it before, it was cool. Now it's much more common. Now, of course, there weren't the resources available, but just the read aloud is one of the things you encouraged me early on to do, read books aloud to the kids. And one of the things that I learned is I enjoy reading them aloud and following the stories as well. There's something about maybe this is something, so there's definitely a theme, I think, to your career and life is teaching and getting other people to learn things. And I've found that in reading a book aloud, you absorb it in ways that are they're not exactly the same. They're something
No.
you're hearing yourself, or you're having to process it in your brain in a way you wouldn't. But I find that I immerse myself in the story a little more by reading it aloud.
It's almost like a muscle. At first, the reading isn't as natural, but the more you do it and the more your kids do it, the more they enjoy it. And there's no better gift you can, well, I don't know, there's probably some, but there are a few gifts you can give your kids better than a love for learning and reading. And the difference is, if you watch a movie, you're watching the director's imagination. If you read a book, you're using your imagination. Also, some of the best books, they tell you what the protagonist is thinking. You can't see that in a movie. So yeah, this is way off base, but my advice would be to parents out there, turn that darn TV off and start small, but start with books you enjoy. So whether you're blowing up stuff in a basement or you're reading books, the key principle is do stuff that you as a parent will enjoy, and your kids will just magically pick up whatever you're enjoying.
But I really see this as not off. I see this as very consistent because, look at the innovation process, like we could talk about what that is. But it's one thing for me as a practitioner to execute it. It's a whole nother level. It's many other levels beyond that to get somebody else to be able to execute it, and beyond that to get it ingrained in a company. So I mean, these experience, and so you've got these children, you're trying to, may not quite understand the why or the usefulness, and you're reading. So I see a lot of connections there. I'll tell you what's funny, reading the books to my kids, a lot of times, they look like they're not paying attention at all. So we've allowed them to like fidget. I mean, I don't know. We give them things to fidget with. They can color, or we give them Legos for play with. And an observer would say, well, they're not tracking that at all, but 100% they are. And I'll ask a question I can't think of an example right now, and they can anticipate it. Well, we read Lord of the Rings last year, and I said, is Gollum good or is he bad? And I got a very nuanced answer in response from that 9-year-old about that didn't fully answer. And it is a bit ambiguous. It was as good an answer as anybody could have had. And so that was a learning for me when they don't appear, you're watching them color, or you're watching them do something, and you assume they're absorbing a lot more than they are or can. And one of the bits of advice, it may have been from you, it may have been from your book, or maybe somewhere else, was gosh, I forget. It was to not dumb it down when you're reading, right. to not oversimplify, let the big words hang out there. And I do a little bit sometimes. There'll be like a very British word, for example. I can't think of an example of capital. There's one, like, so in the 1800s, that's a capital plan. That meant it was wonderful. It's just not so sometimes I'll do things like that, but I
have to dumb it down when I'm reading for myself, but beyond that, I don't want to dumb it down anymore. I was reading Rudyard Kipling's Captain Courageous once when our girls were young. For 3 hours, we were in front of the fireplace, one little head on each shoulder. And that's pretty thick reading if you get into Rudyard Kipling at that time. But I think, coming back to your point, though, I think whether it is us helping our children succeed in something like learning, or whether it is helping a team succeed in new product development, there's almost two levels here. One is my personal success. Can I develop a new product, let's say? And the next level up is, can I help other people do that? And I remember once when I was on a team and we had a great success, and I was preparing little trophies to hand out in an award ceremony. And it dawned on me, I was getting more excited about handing out the trophies. Then I didn't care if anybody said what I did about it. It didn't matter to me. What I really cared about was getting these people the recognition that they deserved, and seeing the look on their face that they had, maybe for the first time in their lives, had developed a product that was wildly successful. So I think that's the motivation for me. I think it's the same for you, Scott, seeing others succeed in this whole endeavor.
For sure.
Yeah.
So it's like,
it's always
go ahead, Jan.
Oh, sorry, that's always a nice experience if somebody has a success and you're part of the reason why. I mean, that's kind of Can I maybe just get a little bit back on this? I wonder about this. I mean, you've coached a lot of people, or taught a lot of people. How does, like, let's say a skeptic could ask, does reading really work? Do people still read? Especially adults? Like, how can you, is that a method that works?
Yeah, so it does. But here's the thing. Now, for children, so there's two things here. One is, as a parent, our children will pick up what we're excited about. So, if I got into hieroglyphics, then my kids are going to get into hieroglyphics. So do we have a little bit of a luxury there as parents? And if we think reading's important or something else, that's what they'll pick up. But bringing it back to new product development and learning new skills in that area, what we find is everybody learns a little differently. There are very few people who don't learn by doing it themselves and hands-on, but that's why we will have e-learning. So people will go through a series of 31 e-learning modules because some people learn that way. We have this massive knowledge center that Scott created because some people will wait till they get stumped and they'll go do a search on the thing. We'll have other people who, will go into the software and they'll figure out how to do it themselves. So I think you make a really good point, Jan. Everybody learns a little bit differently, and you need to provide those different venues so they can kind of zoom in on what they need.
Yeah. And you mentioned our children pick up on what we're excited about. I think that works with adult learners as well.
I do too. Yeah.
Right. And I think, you're a fantastic lecturer. I think one of the reasons is that you're just so enthusiastic about the topic. It comes through. And it's funny. I am too, but I have to remind it's like, what is it? A wise person told me about listening. The wise person's Dan, by the way. Are you listening, and do you look like you're listening? So I'm always excited about the topic, but when I'm personally presenting, I need to remind myself, do I look like I'm excited? It might not always be the same thing.
Well, Scott, they say small minds are easily amused, and I'm easily excited. So there's the parallel.
What I find quite nice and is quite counterintuitive is the fact that you say you have to teach something that you are interested in. And I think that you ask most people and they would say, well, the problem with education is that we're teaching stuff that the students are not interested in. So we have to make it more interesting for the students. And I find it very nice that and you're probably right, actually. It makes sense. Well, if you teach something you're interested in, that they'll be interested in it too.
Yeah, it's interesting, Jonathan. When I'm on the treadmill in the morning, I watch some videos, and there's this thing that is called The Great Courses, a teaching company. And they have these professors, and they pick the best professors from around the country to give on a topic. And the one common denominator, whether they're talking about Egyptian pyramids or biochemistry, it doesn't matter what the topic is. The one thing that's extremely obvious is that lecturer is really excited about their topic. And I think that comes through. So I think that is a very good principle you've pointed out. Find something that you're interested in and then help others get excited and understand it as well.
We probably should come around to new product blueprinting.
Oh, yeah, there is that, isn't there?
Let's talk that. Now, for those who don't know, could you describe new product blueprinting, this process at a high level?
Yeah, it's really the front end of innovation for B2B companies. And so when I say the front end of innovation, that's the real purpose. So if you have a stage gate process, right? You got the front end, you're trying to figure out what customers want. Then you go through a gate, and then you go to the middle stage, is usually called the development stage. And then you go into another gate and you have the launch phase. That's like 3 stages, but they're usually 5, or it could be anything. So when we say the front end, it's whatever you do before you go to that money gate. And if you go through the money gate, you start spending the big bucks and you go in the lab and you push back the frontiers of modern science. Okay. So blueprinting lives there in the front end, but it's only for B2B companies, because our belief is B2B customers are highly knowledgeable, they're interested, they're objective, they have foresight. They can tell you a lot about their needs if you know how to ask. So the heart of that front end work are 2 rounds of interviews. A qualitative interview called discovery. You go out and do maybe 6, 8, 10 of those. And you go back and you do a quantitative interview called preference. The first one's divergent. What else, Mr. Customer, do you want? The last one is convergent. Let's converge on the things that are A, important, and B, not currently satisfied. because the only thing the customer is going to pay you a premium for is something that's important that they're not getting. So that's basically the heart of the blueprinting process. And as you know, Scott, we're trainers. So, we don't do it. Every now and then you do because you're really good at this. But for the most part, we try to get our customers to say, okay, teach me how to do it. And then we teach them so they get really good at it.
How did the process come about, if you can remember the early days of creating it?
It came up, I don't think I ever told you this story. It came about because I didn't understand something. I had a good buddy who was, this is when I was working in a chemical company. He brought in an article on road mapping, and he just threw it on my desk and said, Adams, you got to do something with this. Okay, Sudhir, okay, So I read the article, and I don't know if I'd had too much caffeine or what was going on, but so I started thinking about this, and little by little, I developed this methodology, but I hadn't tried it. So I went to one of my best buddies who was in sales. I'd known him for years, a guy named Bob Valentin. I said, Bob, do you have a customer we could try this out on? I've made these little digital sticky notes in Excel. It's kind of goofy, but I just want to see if it would work. He said, yeah, come on. So we went out to the East Coast and went to a big company that was a customer of ours. And I thought, I don't know if this is going to work, but at least it's me. Bob's got to deal with it, not me, right? So we get in there, and I start recording what they wanted on sticky notes, and we used up all the time. And the guy goes, hey, come on, let's go down to the cafeteria. Can you stay after lunch? Yeah, I can stay. We went down, we got some sandwiches, we came back up, and we were there like 4 hours. They just kept going and going. And I'll never forget, we were walking out to the parking lot, and Bob looks at me and he goes, Dan, I've been calling on these guys for 10 years. I heard stuff here I've never heard before. So that was the beginning of it. And we started playing with it and optimizing it. And finally, we got to a certain point, and I told my boss I wanted to quit, but I wanted to get the severance package. So I said, could you get me fired? And that's a whole nother story. So if our listeners want to know how to get fired, we can go into that sometime as well. But that was the beginning of the whole thing, Scott.
So this was an existing client, sorry, just to specify, this was an existing client of yours that you had been working with?
Yes, it was an existing client. Yeah, right. They've been a client for a long, long time, but we all of a sudden learned all this stuff that we didn't know they wanted using this goofy method that I had come up with.
But can I jump in here? You're saying this goofy method of using sticky notes, and how is that goofy? Is it new? Can you describe it a little bit?
Yeah, so I don't think I realized.
By the way, I don't think it's that goofy. But
okay.
Anyway.
Well, I'll tell you what the method is, and I'll tell you why I think it works. And I don't think I had this figured out at the time. The method is basically you project up on a screen or on a Zoom or Teams call what looks like a bunch of little, 3M Post-it notes, okay? That's what it looks like digitally, okay? And they're different colors. And so the yellow ones are, what problems are you having? So when they say, let's say you're interviewing a paint producer, well, we need better hiding power. Then you start probing. We developed a lot of probing methods. Well, where do you need it? When do you need it? Can you describe what you get today? Then we ask some why questions. Well, how would that impact you? Anything else? Then here's the magic. When you're done with that sticky note on hiding power, you say, what other problems are you seeing? And now you have no idea what the customer is going to say next. So they are leading the interview. And up till this point, all VOC had been, okay, my question number 11 is, my question number 12 is, right? Yeah. So now we're going from a customer-led interview from a supplier-led interview to a customer-led. Why sticky notes, though? Coming back to your question, Jan. I think what happened was when people see sticky notes, there's this little Pavlovian response. Oh, I'm in a brainstorming session. It's my job to fill in those sticky notes. Now, we don't call it brainstorming because we don't want to come up with solutions. We want to come up with outcomes and results. But I think the combination of letting them lead, having it look like something they're supposed to generate ideas, and letting them kind of, and visually displaying it so they can see what you're recording. The combination of those three things creates an environment that you'll never have if you're the salesman sitting across the desk saying, so what else do you want? Of course, customers can't tell you what they want because you haven't given the proper environment for it. So setting up the right environment, I think, is the key here.
And what, in your opinion, was the key difference between this approach and what you had been doing previously? What do you think was the key thing?
So I had tried a lot of different methods up till then. I had actually gone around and benchmarked a lot of companies, including 3M. And I'll never forget what the 3M folks, when they were the best. Okay?
Hence the stickies.
Hence, well, yeah. So that was probably subliminal, Jonathan. I came back years later, but you're probably exactly right. I'll never forget what the 3M guy said. I said, "What's your secret?" He goes, "We just figure out what our customers' problems are, then we work on those." Like, brilliant. Okay, but unfortunately, it took me a long time to get to that in a practical way. So I was following other methods where you would go in and you'd ask a bunch of questions. And so I would do that. And I still remember I had a big spreadsheet. And so the rows were all the companies I was interviewing, and the columns were all the questions I was asking. I created an Excel spreadsheet wallpaper. I mean, this thing was enormous, right? And I remember looking at that thing saying, I have no idea what to do with this. And so all the other methods I tried up till here just weren't working. So it's probably going back to the J. Paul Getty formula of success. You know, this one stumbled into it and it worked. So then we just kept building on that.
Yeah. I saw it. I remember seeing in other companies, seeing these exactly those. Well, it's their Miro boards or whatever, but exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Thousands of different informations. All the questions are pre-written, and then you stand in front of the 2-meter wall, and now what? Like,
now what? Exactly.
It looks beautiful. I mean, in terms of aesthetics, it's beautiful, but now what?
You know, Scott is our master of doing surveys. So what we have a little principle, whether it's a survey or whether you're doing a process like VOC, you never want to ask somebody a question unless you know what you're going to do with the answer. You need to think ahead. What am I going to do with the answers I get? And a lot of people go out and do VOC, have no idea what to do with it. Scott and I did some research. He actually created the survey for this. It was brilliant. And we asked people on 12 different VOC skills what was most important. And the one that came out was prioritize. And it's for exactly what you're saying, Jan. People get all this stuff and they don't know how to prioritize it. And that's where the second round of interviews we call preference. We say how important on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied on a scale of 1 to 10, and then we know what to do with that data afterwards. That's the key.
Yeah. I think that survey is accessible, right? So the survey is on the website and you can get it. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, just to get back to the method. So you were saying you have 3 different types of sticky notes, right? Mm-hmm. 3 different colors. Was that what you were saying? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
And so the first question is, what are your problems? And then you said you ask, okay, once they've answered, I guess that goes on the first set of sticky notes.
Yeah, the yellow ones. You might get 10, you might get 20, you never know. But yeah, they keep going until they run out. That's right.
And then once they finished, you ask them for additional problems. Is that correct?
Then what you say, once they run out of problems, you say, okay, that's great on the yellow sticky notes. Now we got some green ones here. Let me ask it this way. What would your ideal world look like? And then they run. Now there's still outcomes, okay? And sometimes, you know, it's kind of funny. They might say hiding power is a problem on a yellow sticky note, and on the green, they might say, oh, my ideal world would be to have great hiding power. It's just coming at it in a different way, right? And then the third, the blue sticky notes, we call these triggered ideas. And we say, let me put out something that might trigger some more thinking. I borrowed this from some people that we used to bring in when I was in a company that would do brainstorm facilitation. Now, trigger method is something that gets your brain thinking in a fresh new way. So we might put like an Ishikawa or a fishbone diagram up that has all these trends. We might say to the customer, as you're looking at all these demographic and technology trends and so forth and economic, does that give you any other ideas? And they might go, yeah, this one here on labor shortages, you know, we need a better training program here for our paint contractors. You never know what they're going to generate, but that's the third one. Again, just more outcomes, but you're coming at it in a different way.
You know, it's interesting, the commonalities in lots of different innovation methods. You end up in a lot of same places. I took a course in the early 90s from a gentleman, Min Ambassador, who's a longtime guy with P&G. And that was the first time I ever was exposed to brainstorming, rules of that, and divergence and convergence, and those patterns. And also what he had also a method that basically what I sort of stole later or used, or what, to understand different levels of jobs, something that, we could talk about. But we have all these different methods, but there's so many commonalities to whether it's the brainstorming and where you're reserving judgment and then applying judgment to brainstorming is very much analogous to with the customer. You're reserving judgment from them. Everything's a good answer, and just like all ideas are good ideas too. Now applying judgment, we have to do that later. I do this a lot. I don't really have a question. It's just an observation, but it's amazing these patterns. I fact that and a lot of us can begin as innovation practitioners learning a method or whatever. Then you learn a different method and a different method, and there's just so many commonalities between all of them. It's like all roads sort of lead you to the same place. And Dan, you mentioned that when you started with your voice of the customer, I think you followed a pattern that a lot of other folks do, me included, where initially it was almost you felt successful in just doing the work. Oh, I interviewed a customer. I'm doing the work. But then you get back and you don't realize it's not as useful as you want it to. It's like, you need to tweak the process. I think that's a common pattern. Certainly it is for myself.
Well, and the other thing, Scott, your point on these common patterns is spot on, because human behavior is human behavior. We don't have to get into all the psychology behind it, but you and I have talked about this. The landmark book on selling is Spin. It was written by Neil Rackham, of Huthwaite Institute, and the SPIN stands for situation, problems, implication, and needs application. And so, it didn't dawn on us till years after we had developed our methodology, but we start our interviews with a couple current state questions just to warm them up, icebreakers. Well, that's the situation. Then we get into the problems, and that's it. And then we ask for the what and why questions. Why is that? Well, that's the implication. And then we narrow it down to what the actual needs are and create something called an outcome statement, which we should give credit to Tony Ulwick for. That was something we borrowed from Tony. But again, these basic principles, they will apply. So whether you're a salesperson or you're trying to work on a new product, a lot of the principles really apply across the board here.
And you got something else you said. You mentioned when you sort of had the method worked out. It sounded like you had that first interview that was really like in sort of your new way of looking at the world, and that you were just, I don't know if surprised is the right word, but maybe pleasantly surprised.
I was.
Well,
sure I was.
I think that's also for new practitioners. There's this feeling that, well, I'm going to annoy my customer. They're not going to really like this session. Oh, yeah. But the truth is, if the scope is set well, meaning that it's a topic of interest to them, it's something they're trying to do, then they love this opportunity to share. And almost regardless of how introverted, extroverted, for them, when they have this opportunity to feel listened to share these challenges, 100% is a pretty big number, but something close to 100% of the time, it's a really positive experience for the interviewee as they open up. And that's something that it's, when we're teaching, I tell new practitioners that, but they look at me askew. They don't believe me. But it's true. I remember doing interviews with John Deere, and we would visit with folks at their properties. Now, if you have, 100 acres and you're in the middle of nowhere, you're not used to a lot of visitors, and so we would go there and we'd have this, be there for a couple hours talking with them. And when we would arrive, we had our notebooks and they were looking at us very suspiciously and, kind of askew. What are these crazy kids doing? 2 hours later, call us the next time you're in town. They weren't, they're really getting a little too close to us, but it's been an endearing experience to them.
Yeah, let us know. Ma will put a roast on for you next time you're back in town, right? It's great. But you're absolutely right, Scott. Turns out people like being listened to. Who knew, right?
Right.
You go in there, if you say, I have my questions or I have my hypothesis I want to validate, well, that's not too exciting, if you go in and you say, but we really want to know what's important to you, and we're going to listen hard, and we're going to ask intelligent questions. And by the way, we just think you're absolutely fascinating, sir or ma'am. Turns out they really like that. And you're right. I was a little surprised. Somebody defined exhilaration as that time after you come up with a great idea and just before you realize what's wrong with it. So there was that exhilaration, but we're still pretty excited about it, aren't we?
For sure.
Still having fun with it.
100%.
But I feel like it really takes, that's on the part of the person who's leading who's leading the interview in brackets. You're describing it exactly the other way around, so that the customer is leading the interview, which I think is more correct. Yeah. But it takes, I think, at least in my experience, it takes a lot to really be able to abstain from your judgment, from what you want to get, and just we say, well, I just want to understand, but really doing this it takes a lot of effort. I think it's for quite a lot of people, this is new. So
well, you're spot on, Jan. One of the things we have to coach pretty hard on is sometimes people like to ask these long questions to demonstrate that they're really smart, right?
Yes.
And they say, well, Dan or Scott, I don't want to just say, why is that important or how does that happen? They'll think I'm dumb. And I want to lean forward. I have to think of a better way of doing this. I want to lean forward and whisper in their ear, they don't care about you. They're not thinking about you, man. They're thinking about themselves. Forget about you, Yeah. They want, if you can go in and set them up as the master and you are the student, that's the scenario that you're looking for here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think they don't care about you is a pretty good life lesson, even beyond innovation. I think you can help people actually.
Yeah, I can tell you, now that I'm at this age, I can tell you the story. There was an old man who said, when I was a young man, I worried about what people thought about me. And then I got to middle age, and you know what? I stopped worrying about what they thought about me. And now that I'm an old man, I realized they weren't thinking about me.
Yeah.
So, and there's a lot of truth to that,
Yeah.
There is.
But I think there is one point I think where I immediately connect to this not being you as an interviewee, you don't have to show your expertise. We show different, when we do this, we show different kinds of, there are different kinds of questions. And I think you highlighted this nicely. So your probing questions and why questions. And we have a set that we call them fool's questions. So questions where you play dumb less effectively. Right. But where you really, we ask people, how do you know that you're hungry? Which is a pretty stupid question in bracket, but right? But for the purpose of the project, that's really relevant.
It is.
And then it's not about you or your expertise, but you play even more. You have to be relevant in the sense of, I want to understand that person. But it's okay to ask something that apparently is obvious, which usually, most often it's not.
Well, Jan, to your point, Scott and I have observed this as we've coached many, many teams. Oftentimes the moderator will say, I thought I knew why they wanted it, but just in case I asked one more question, why is that important? And they said, they gave me something totally different than what I was imagining. So sometimes we recommend, especially for teams getting started, if you've got a technology person who's like the guru on this, and you've got the salesperson who's been calling this account for 10 years, they probably aren't your best moderator. Find somebody from the office who is not as familiar, who has permission to ask the dumb questions. When I was in marketing, the more experienced salespeople, we'd be driving, in the rental car to the meeting. It wasn't maybe an interview. And the salesperson would lean over and say, ask them these questions, because I can't ask them anymore. And so that's really what we want to do here.
Yeah.
So in that case,
go ahead.
I was going to say, so in that case, the salesman really did have something he wanted to know, but just didn't feel like he could, or he would
couldn't ask anymore. He's supposed to know. He would have been embarrassed to ask. So he needed somebody else to ask the fool's questions, to Jan's point. He needed a fool, and I was there.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, so you need to play the fool as you ask the questions. But of course, you need to be aware of what the people are saying. And there's a lot of work that goes into analyzing what they say afterwards, of course. But I think it's also important to be able to parse what the person is saying as you're listening to him also, or her. My question, I had a kind of bit of a maybe trick question or difficult question. Sounds like a silly question, but how do you look out for problems? For instance, you're talking about identifying the problems. What in your view would be a problem that a customer might come up with? What does it mean, a problem?
Yeah, great. So let's go back to the example of we make paint ingredients, and let's say our customer is a paint producer. The problems fall into two areas. They're really outcomes is what they are, but we will call them problems because people like to talk about their problems. Lily Tomlin once said, mankind invented language to satisfy his deep longing to complain. So we love to talk about our problems. That's why we start with that, okay? So let's imagine you're interviewing, a paint producer and say, what kind of problems are you having? And you'll give them the scope, production and sale of sunlight glass paint. And so it could be a process-related problem or a product-related problem. So a process-related problem is, oh man, we're having a hard time getting these pigments, into the system. We need to increase the throughput of our manufacturing. We got to cut down defects. We're using too much labor here. Those are all process-related to make the paint. But it could be product-related problems. We don't have enough hiding power. We're getting a lot of fading. We need better UV resistance. Oh man, when people get crayon marks on that paint, it's a terrible thing to get it cleaned off. We need crayon removal to be better. So all the problems for B2B will fall into either customers' processes or customers' products. So those are them. And we don't really care which they are. At the time, but when we hear crayon removal, oh, well, describe that for me a little bit more. That's a what question. Where do you see that? When do you see it? How often does it happen? How long does it take to clean it off now? Those are all what questions. Then we move into the why questions. Well, how does that impact you? Oh, you're getting a lot of returns. How many? And boom, 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 and off we go. Then before we're done with that sticky note, we say, is there anything else we should know about these crayon remarks before we move on? No? Okay. What other problems are you having? And now we're on to, I need better throughput on the machine. Here's the cool thing about it. I remember once a fellow in the UK, he'd been out on like 5 or 6 interviews, and he was just beaming at one of our sessions, our coaching session. He goes, Dan, he says, I could go into any interview in any industry on the planet and do this now. And what he was saying was, yes, he needs to get the terminology and all that, but it's not about his questions. He does not have to come up with a brilliant list of questions. He has learned how to brilliantly probe whatever the customer comes up with. That's the cool part of this.
I think that is a breakthrough for an interviewer when they realize they don't have to have all the answers. In fact, they shouldn't have all the answers. they put a lot of pressure on themselves to share expertise. I want to ask you a question about something that I think is left out of a lot of innovation processes. Let's take your hiding power example, and just to keep it simple, let's imagine we can measure it. There's the hiding powder-o-meter, and it goes from 1 to 1,000 or whatever. And so customers, let's just say we've learned it's very important to improve the hiding power. It's very low satisfied. But something that's often left out of most methods is, well, if I take it up 10%, does that matter? 5%? Yeah. Because presumably if I improve performance, usually, there may be some magic or alchemy, but most of the time that does mean adding cost to improve performance. So with that example, so that leads to the engineering question, how much can I improve it? How would you address that?
Yeah. So Scott, as you know, you've hit on something which is quite fascinating to us. So in the world of B2B, we're trying to get our clients all to the point where, and our clients are doing good. We're trying to get B2B industry to the point where they at least know what to work on. We know that we call it a market satisfaction gap, right? This outcome is really important. It's not satisfied. We got to work on it. And so we declare victory and we go home in probably 90% of the cases. Probably only 10% of our clients, even today, understand the next level. Once we get them all up to that level, the next level is this magic, which you're referring to, which we've never seen in any other methodology on the planet. It takes place in preference interviews, and here's how it goes. After you ask them for a 1 to 10 score on hiding power, how important, and a 1 to 10 score on satisfaction, how important, we have 3 more really critical questions. The first one is, how would you know if you had good hiding power? And they might have a thing where they dilute it to this and they put it on this pattern in the lab and they can see through and how many codes, who knows what the test is, okay? And then we say, now using that methodology, at what point would you consider it to be barely acceptable? And at what point would you consider yourself to be totally satisfied? And they might say, well, using this diluted thing with this checkered pattern, yada, 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 you know, if it's more than 5 codes, I got a problem, okay? And what would be totally satisfied? Well, if I could get 1 code, even with this diluted thing, I'd be totally satisfied. Now, what have we done here? We have created a satisfaction ruler, okay? The 5 correlates to barely acceptable. The 10 correlates to totally satisfied. Now that we know how customers measure how good is good enough, we actually don't even need a prototype to lob at them later because we are now modeling their behavior. So think about this. B2B customers can go to guessing what customers want. Then they can move up to understanding. The highest level is they can model what customers want. They can completely in their lab replicate the customer experience. Now, very few companies do this, but it's hugely powerful. And you actually had an example on noise levels that actually helped me understand why this is so important.
Yeah. I think it's I think this, how much do we improve, is something it's a part of new product blueprinting that is, I don't know if I've ever seen it in another method. Funny, Dan, when I was at John Deere, I guess similar to you, I had my own cobbled method in which I tackled that, also in Excel. I had never seen it anywhere until I saw it in your process. I mean, of course, yours was much more refined and matured and had a lot more behind it, but I was trying to get at this same thing. But the big breakthrough that I learned from you is this locking the scale point at this barely acceptable. So on the barely acceptable level, whatever that is, and then there's the totally satisfied. And if we can understand the performance of those numbers, well, we know there's a range you have to be in. So the noise example I'll refer to is at John Deere, when you have a cab tractor, one of the challenges with a cab tractor is noise. It gets very loud, and they can be designed that you can design it in advance to sort of be quieter. And if they don't do a good job, then they end up stuffing foam in every compartment. It's not a very elegant solution. So what you have is you have sound engineers, and every day we might have to hire some of those to help with our podcast. But we have these sound engineers, and every day when they get up in the morning, like, now my job is to make this cab tractor quieter. And they go to design and they go to think, and from the time they get up to the time they go to bed, they're making the cab quieter and quieter. Well, as it's getting quieter and quieter, you know, there's some noise level beyond which, like, the customer doesn't care, right? It's still so if we give out 85 decibels, that's about the number your hearing's getting damaged. So we'll presume you want it lower than that. But then as it gets quieter and quieter and quieter, there's some level where you pass this barely acceptable, and you're making the tractor even quieter. And so if you're driving cost, you're literally destroying value. You're literally destroying value by making it, because you're making it more expensive. And in the example of a tractor, it's actually worse than that, because it turns out customers expect some level of sound. There's something satisfying about noise, so they're actually disturbed. And maybe that's something they would get over in time if they got recalibrated. But I never found this anywhere in any other method, this very important question of, let me back up. So with a normal VOC, when you finish, you're going to learn, I need to improve something. I need to make this quieter. But what's missing from virtually, I think, anything I could ever think of, how much do I make it quieter? And then that's super, because that's what your engineers are looking to you for. They're like, oh, I can stuff a bit of foam here, but do I need to make it 10%, 50%, 100%? And what is it? And that's one of the things I personally really appreciate about blueprinting.
And the funny thing is, Scott, is, you know, we used to try to teach all of that, and we would just overwhelm our clients. So we've gotten to the point where if we could just get them understanding customer needs, importance, and satisfaction, and working on the right stuff, we declare victory and go home in most of the cases, right? But what's fascinating is how long will it be before B2B companies really do everything they could do? I mean, it's not that hard, what you and I just described. Will it be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? I mean, I'll probably be retired. Maybe you'll be the one who's teaching people how to do this last part of modeling, the behavior. But, as long as people are moving forward, we feel like we're doing some good. But the point is, there's a lot that can be done in B2B, and most companies have not even begun to scratch the surface.
Right.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, probably even this, just thinking in terms of outcomes, thinking in terms of importance and satisfaction, already that is a big step. But then I understand, I completely agree. This is very new to me, this part where you kind of retranslate it back into almost an engineer. I figure it shows that there is an engineering background in the methodology somewhere, that you kind of retranslate this back into how can I then measure the solution. So first we are in needs, we want to just understand it, but then again it jumps back into measuring the solution, basically, or how they measure the solution.
It's almost mind-boggling, but when you think about it, you are able to interview these really intelligent engineers and technical people and marketing people at your customers, and you are able to learn enough that you can replicate their decision-making in your own lab, in your own operation to an amazing extent. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do a prototype, because the prototype is another way of refining it. It's also a great way of engaging customers more. So you can still do that. But the point is, it's silly to be lobbing prototypes at customers, hoping they like it, when we can know what they want before they ever see the prototype.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's very unadvisable to try to take a prototype and try to figure out the problem. Yeah. I've seen companies do that, where they kind of cobble it together and then search for the problem with a prototype. And that gets you lost in all kinds of ways.
Well, it's kind of like, you guys are, of course, very familiar with minimum viable prototypes, MVPs. And that's great for consumers. You've got a limitless pool of testers with consumers. But, think about it. I talked to a guy at GE Aerospace, and goes, yeah, my B2B customers aren't too interested in minimum viable jet aircraft engines,
Yeah, and they can barely fly.
Exactly right. Yeah, some of the time. I mean, so you don't want to frustrate your customers with silly prototypes, nor do you want to waste all of your engineers' time putting those silly prototypes together, when you can have some intelligent conversations and really zoom in on what they want. It's kind of a goofy approach, frankly.
Yeah. Very powerful.
Yeah. I just have to tell this one quick little story about the prototype. The product I was on with John Deere, we have these biases in us we don't even realize we had, right? And I had very good feedback that customers wanted to use their tractors in low light conditions. And so I presumed that meant they wanted to mow at night. This particular tractor was a mowing tractor. They mowed more than anything else. So we got the prototypes made. We took them to Virginia. They're like, no, we don't need to mow at night. I'm like, okay. We went to Houston, Texas. They said, no, we don't need to mow at night. And I'm like, what have I done wrong? We went to Wisconsin. They loved it. Went to Minnesota. They loved it. What they wanted to do, they wanted to use their tractor to remove snow from their driveways before driving to work in the morning. And so there was a bias I had in my head, just based on where I grew up. I made an assumption, never realized I'd even made it, and did not know until, so that, and of course I get that story to tell for in perpetuity now. But anyway, that was one thing that the prototype flushed out, that it was an error in logic that I had made based on my own lack of no experience. Dan, you probably could have helped me out with that if I did. Well, so it seems like we go from progression from being a practitioner to being a teacher, and then a teacher of a team, to now, like, maybe the highest level is working with a company at the highest level. Yeah. So imagine like a new CEO is hired, a large corporation, and wants to improve the innovation culture. What's step one? What advice would you provide them?
Well, the first thing is get your goals squared away. If your goal is to maximize shareholder wealth, please change it. I mean, Jack Welch, the master of this, later on said it's the dumbest idea in the world. And so what I would recommend is be very clear-headed about what is the goal you want everybody in your organization to go after. And you want me to suggest one? Well, funny, I do have one. My suggestion is your goal should be understand and meet customer needs better than others. Say it one more time. Understand and meet customer needs better than others. If a company does this, everything else will fall. I mean, maximizing shareholder wealth is a lovely result. It's just a lousy goal. Your goal should be inspiring and should be actionable. No employee knows how to raise earnings per share this quarter, but hopefully we can learn how to understand what our customers want in our target markets, and we can meet those needs. So the first thing is getting that goal really squared away. The second thing is be a little bit careful about your balance between results and capabilities. Stephen Covey said a long time ago, we should balance P and PC. P was production, PC was productive capabilities. So let's put it in different terms. Let's just call it results and capabilities, okay? And so what I find is, in most businesses, especially in American businesses, there's this overriding intensity on results, but with not much of a focus on capabilities. So imagine the four of us decide we were going to go rock climbing. We go out to El Capitan in Yosemite, okay? Now, none of us has the right equipment. Maybe we have a little paunch on, our tummies, we don't have any skills whatsoever for climbing, but by golly, we want results, right? So how's that going to go for us? So you'll
get results.
Yeah, you'll get results. Exactly. Hopefully you'll fall before you get too far up, right? And if you think about any endeavor you can imagine. It could be golf, it could be pole vaulting, it could be chess. Doesn't the champion focus on building their capabilities? The one exception is the business world. We're just going to focus on results every quarter. So that's what I would say is, make sure you understand what your goal is and then build those capabilities in your organization. And then you have to ask which ones. Well, thankfully, Scott and I did some research and we said, what growth drivers of 24 growth drivers? It could be a stage gate process. It could be anything. It could be all kinds of things. Which of these are the ones that are most impactful for driving organic growth? Turns out the top three differentiators are pick the right market segments and concentrate your resources, do really, really good front-end work, and number three is get your customer interviews, which is really part of the subset of the front end, really nail those. Those are the three biggest differentiators between the winners and losers. So a clear-headed goal, and then focus on the capabilities that really make a difference, which, really for B2B, and this is all B2B, by the way, the research, it's really that front end and getting customer needs figured out. And by the way, let me just add one thing. This shouldn't surprise us because for over 5 decades, research shows the number one cause of new product failures is inadequate market analysis. So it's not like this should be a big surprise at figuring out customer needs is where the action is. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jan.
No, well, two things. I mean, first one, I think I really like this, how you framed that all the, I mean, there is monetary stuff, right? I mean, we're in B2B, we want to make money. So that's what a business is. It might not be the sole purpose that we have, but it is a lot about that. But it's a result. It's a result of something else. So I love how you kind of, it's not the goal, but it's kind of the reward that we get at the end, but it's not the treasure chest. Like it's not, so that we might be rewarded by financial incentives and so on in the end, but it's not what, if that becomes the goal, you start doing very, very different things. But if the customer need and really serving your customers, if that is the goal, that completely changes. I mean, you go away from all these I mean, you can get growth by just cutting costs.
Yeah. Can you think
on the paper that gets you growth? I mean, you can do that.
That's right. I mean, can you think of any corporation on the planet and think of the founder? It could be Henry Ford. It could be Jeff Bezos. Think of any founder in the world. Did they wake up in the morning and say, my goal is to make as much money and make my shareholders happy? No, they figured out what their customers needed, and they had this passionate, heat-seeking missile intensity to satisfy those needs. If you have this as your goal, understand and meet customer needs, then the financial results will follow along like a bunch of little goslings after their mother goose. That just happens. But that shouldn't be the main goal here.
Yeah, I agree. But I think the second point, and I wonder if you would agree, I'm not so sure, but in a sense, yes, probably we're in the wrong room. For all of us, this might be obvious, but I think this understanding customer needs is largely that is very difficult because we didn't really have a process. For a long time, we didn't know how or what, like, or maybe even if you somehow had the gut feeling, I need to understand my customers better, but what does that mean? How do I do this? And we lack a certain, well, maybe, I don't know, do we lack a skill, a process, but we didn't know how.
Yeah, well, that's where I think Scott and I get excited. You know, our mantra is we like to provide coaching, but also tools. And sometimes it's software, it's e-learning, it's a lot of different tools. And we even do things like after the team is done, they can press a button and it creates a PowerPoint presentation, right? So our mantra is, let's do everything for these really, really busy teams so they have the time to do only that which they can do. I mean, I'm not saying you never would get a hired gun to drop in, parachute, and interview your customers. There might be some cases where that's important. But in the B2B world, you need to develop these skills yourself. It's a competitive advantage. So we want B2B engineers and chemists and marketing people to really own these skills and really understand them. But what we don't want them doing is wasting their time coming up with their own methods and processes and PowerPoint slides and figuring out 4 ways to do it wrong before they figure out the one right way. So, you know, our goal is to help them develop the skills and tools and methodology as efficiently as they possibly can. And then just turn them loose. And it's pretty exciting, frankly, when they get there.
It's nice. It seems like also you're motivated by what was the mantra? Understand the needs and then meet the
understand and meet customer needs. And the reason I put that in there, you could just say meet customer needs. Yeah, okay. But the reason I put understand and meet customer needs is there's 2 different operations here. Okay. So the understand part, let's say you were the CEO of a company and you said, which am I going to focus on first? Am I going to focus the understand part or am I going to understand the meet part? Well, if you decide you're going to focus on the meet part, then your job would be go out and hire a bunch of scientists that are 20% brighter and hire a bunch more of them. I'm not sure that's going to get you where you want to go as efficiently as you focus on the understand part, where most B2B companies are doing far, far less than they can. Scott and I did this research on B2B VOC skills earlier this year. And when you go through the numbers, it's very easy to get a 30-fold return on investment for training your people in how to do the front end. And the initial reaction I would have if somebody told me that is, well, you got to be fudging the numbers. How can you possibly get a 30-fold ROI on something? And my answer, it took me a while to figure out. I kept checking my numbers. Here's the answer. The answer is you're already spending millions or tens of millions of dollars on meeting customer needs. All you got to do is aim those massive resources a little bit better, and you have just overwhelmed your training investment. And so that's why I like to break it into understand and meet. And let's focus on the understand unless we're already doing this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, no, sorry, go on, Scott.
I was just going to say that it's interesting how, companies, they don't mind spending, millions of dollars on tooling or on this and that. And it's just accepted. That's just part of R&D. It's just accepted as almost like we're counting on getting lucky, which seems like a terrible strategy. I want to go back to your point about capabilities. I think that is such something. I think that is tremendous advice for that new CEO. It's funny. I was just giving a presentation recently, and somebody asked me, "Well, how would jobs be done? Go after complete white space. So if your company has no capabilities, no anything at all, how would you go after it?" And they were wanting some examples, and I said, "You don't go after it." I don't know if that's the right answer or wrong answer. That's my answer. I was like, "You don't do it. You're building off some base of something. You know, it's going to rarely be a great business decision to completely just ignore your brand, your distribution, all your advantages, and just do something out of the blue." Yeah. I don't think they liked my answer, but I like the idea.
But it's a good one.
But you know, your idea about climbing the mountain, I think, really helps to explain a lot. In that there's consequences for not being. Like Jonathan said, you'll get results. You know, there's consequences for trying something that's beyond your capabilities, and it could be ugly. It might not be what you expect. And if we just continue with that metaphor, you know, if we're going to have goals, maybe the goal should be, you know, like if you were to stick with that training one, well, my goal for today should be to eat these types of foods, to do these exercises. My goal should be just a much shorter. My goal should be to attain those capabilities, and then from there you can do lots of things.
Yeah, I sometimes challenge people because I'd like to hear this. Maybe some of our listeners will drop a note. Can we think of any endeavor, any human endeavor, where the winners, the champions, the successful did not focus intently on developing their capabilities? I can't think of any. You know, I'm still struggling.
The closest thing that occurs to me is like a lottery winner. You know, but that's obviously luck. And then I'm not an expert on this, but it's my understanding there's a pretty decent percentage of those who lose all their money, completely lose it all, because they didn't develop the capabilities of managing finances. And so even when it was literally just handed to them, they couldn't, they still lost, if you will.
They actually, some studies say they not only do they lose what they won, but they are in worse position, relationships and otherwise, they wish they would have never won. That's not true for all. But certainly anything that is not out of the complete realm of luck, you know, I mean, a Jeopardy winner, a singing star, I mean, it just goes on and on. They worked on their capabilities, you know, but maybe the only exception is the business world. Let's work on the results really hard and let's hit the reset button next year and start all over again. Well, didn't work out too well.
But I just listening to you talking right now, maybe I'm completely off, but maybe it even takes the prior realization that this is a skill. It's a skill you can learn.
Yes.
So exactly. Maybe a lot of us, whoever us is, but a lot started off with the idea that innovation is exactly luck. Is exactly I'm sitting at my desk and I fumble around, and then by some kind of miracle or whatever accident, I figure out the best blah blah blah. And some inventions, I mean, they happened like this, but maybe it's the image that we have of innovation that it is not a skill. It is not something that we can learn, which is what we're really up against.
Yeah, I mean, almost when you look at almost any innovation that matters, it was preceded by huge amounts of learning that took place first. It may have been in that same area, or it may have been in a different one. A lot of trial and error, a lot of experience, a lot of failures. You know, we learn from our failures. So yeah, I mean, you know, you can get lucky every now and then. And I did get lucky in that lab, you know, trying to create a water-based thickener that didn't need much stirring, because it was like lumpy gravy, you know. But believe me, I tried dozens and dozens of other things before we got to that one. And so I think that's the case for most innovators.
Yeah.
So what's next for Dan Adams? What are you excited about over the next year?
You know, you and I have talked about this a little bit, Scott, but the number one difference when we work with a new client between success and failure, there are different grades of it in between there, is really leadership and of the company, right? And when we get what we call a builder, somebody who really wants to build something, like the same mentality as the founder of that company has. It's Katie bar the door, you know, we are off to the races, we're hugely successful. But what we've learned is, you know, we can train all these people, but we shouldn't just expect that the business leaders get it, right? They have tremendous pressure on the short term, and I empathize with them. So as you know, we put together 50 videos, just 2 minutes each, so it's not too painful. and everybody can watch them. But we've especially targeted them for leaders, and they can have one per day for 10 weeks or one per week for a year, drip, 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 right? But we want to change their way of thinking. So the thing that you and I are thinking, Scott, the last frontier for the AIM Institute when it comes to the implementation of blueprinting is how do we get to those leaders and take them to a new level of thinking? How do we get, and they're not all going to be builders, and we're not going to win in all of them, but the ones that have that desire in their heart, that really want to build something of significance, how do we equip them? How do we help them get past the some of the dangers of near-term, financial pleasing the shareholder? That's the last frontier for us, and that's what we're working on now.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I've got one final question. John or Jonathan, you guys have anything else?
Well,
I did have a question, but I'm worried it might take us off on a tangent. So I can ask it, and we can see if we want to answer it or not. Yeah, so it's about something I've been thinking about myself. It's just been running through my head for some time, which is the following. We talk about understanding the customer needs and understanding their problems, etc. And what I was wondering is, then of course you need to go and build a product, a service. But often through the act of building a product or service, then you're going to create actually new problems. And I'm kind of wondering how that all fits together. So I give an example. You have some machine, some fridge, let's say a fridge, and the problem, is that you want your fridge to help you with filling itself up or something, filling it up. So you have some kind of connected fridge, and it's all great. But unfortunately, through this new functionality, you're actually creating all sorts of new problems that appear. So now you have this new fridge with new functionality and new problems. What happens if the internet connection goes down? What happens if I've not thought about that specific example, but my question is, there's kind of a feedback loop between the problem. If we talk about problem space and solution space, there's this kind of feedback that goes. So it's not just that you have a fixed problem space and then you'll kind of just match up a solution to that problem space, but actually through creating the solution, you're impacting and modifying the problem space too.
Well, that's a very good point.
I don't really have an answer to that, but it's just something that I've been wondering about. I wondered if anyone had it.
It's a very good point. I think there's two things to help us with that, because it's a very real problem. The first one is, when we get these outcomes, we may have dozens of outcomes, okay? So if you arrayed them on a matrix where you had importance on one scale and satisfaction on another, you could imagine these little bubbles on any of those corners, okay? So let's get rid of two corners right away. If it's not important, we won't worry about it, okay? But it leaves us with two very important corners, yeah. The one corner is the one I, talked about earlier, something that's important that they're not getting today. That's what they might pay a premium. But the other one, which you're alluding to here as well, is something that's important that they're already getting today. So we don't want to ignore those. We want to make sure we understand what they're getting today that they want to keep getting, so we don't lose something in our new innovation. And then we also hopefully will have something that is important that they're not getting. So we want to keep both those in mind. So that's the first thing. But the second one, I think you're alluding to this one as well, is we don't want to just stop and say we took a snapshot picture of what the customers wanted at the end of front end. Now we're going to go away into our deep recesses. So I think this is to your point, Jonathan. We need to keep the dialogue going. We need to keep engaging them. Hey, we're thinking about this. What about this? We maybe have a lead customer or two that we can work with very closely on this thing. So we do need to just not move away from that customer interaction. We need to stay in touch so we don't slip up and create a new problem that we didn't know about. Yeah. Good. That's very good. I like it.
All right.
Yeah.
One final question is kind of different, but then you know how Google has these like unique messages, like each day, or not every day, but one day, sort of unique things. If they were to let you add any message you wanted on that page for one day for the whole world to see, what would you put up there?
Wow, for one day.
Go to theaveinstitute.com. That'd be a good one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Click here for a consultation with our very own Scott Burleson.
Right.
I think I would go back to that goal of understanding and meeting customer needs. The more I'm at this, I'm very passionate about the training and the methodology and all of this. But I'm getting more and more interested in how do we get companies thinking differently about their mandate. Now, there's a lot of good stuff happening. People are moving away from just shareholders, and they're talking about stakeholders and all these other things. And I don't think I can maybe get this. Maybe I'd put up Peter Drucker's quote if you'd let me put that one up, and that would be, there are only two business functions: marketing and innovation. All the rest are costs. So I might put that one up there to get people's attention. And then when you think about marketing and innovation as the only business function and everything else being a cost, it really takes us back to market-facing innovation. That's what we got to focus on. If we're interested in strong organic growth, it just keeps coming back to market-facing innovation. I did a webinar yesterday, Scott, and the last question in the interview was, well, could these methods apply to that book called The Disciplines of Market Leaders by Tracy and Wersima, who, and I know Fred, a great guy, you know Michael, a great guy, where they said there are three ways of winning, right? Customer intimacy, operational efficiency, and product leadership. And they said, could these interview methods? I said, yeah, they could be used. But I said, but why would you want to make anything other than product leadership your main goal? I said, Booz Allen has done the research, and they originally started with those, but they realized the real winners were focusing on creating new products. I said, if you focus on operational innovation, it's a race to the bottom. If you focus on customer intimacy, doesn't matter how friendly your salespeople are. If a competitor comes up with a product that helps your customers compete more effectively, they're not going to buy from you anymore. So, in the long term, it is truly market-facing innovation. There's our Google, market-facing innovation.
I love it, market-facing innovation. And to that question, they still need to understand and meet customer needs. They still need to build products. They need to understand and meet customer needs if they're going to have that customer intimacy. And guess what? They still need to be operationally excellent. There's nothing. Exactly. There's nothing that doing that's going to keep you from being operationally excellent. So that was a great answer. All right.
Well, Dan, I would click that.
What's that?
I would click on that.
Well, this has been so much fun. Before we wrap up, Dan, anything else you'd like to let folks know about?
No, I think this is great. I know you guys are focusing on jobs to be done, so maybe I'll just bring that in just very quickly. It all starts with understanding the customer's job to be done. A lot of teams, you and I have seen this, Scott, they start with my product idea. And that's okay to have a concept. But if you're going to do this customer insight well, start with the customer's job to be done, and then understand all those outcomes within that job to be done, and zoom in on the ones that are important and not satisfied. So it does start with JTB. It's job to be done is the beginning of the whole process.
One of my favorite things you would say with that, like if you have a product idea, it's not like an evil thought or anything.
It's not.
All right. Fantastic. Well, awesome. Thank you, Dan Adams, so much for spending time with us today. I think you've shown us one of the great secrets to success, in my opinion, is your optimism. I'm a big Churchill fan. Churchill said, "I'm an optimist. It does not seem to be much use being anything else." And I can tell you, you're a great example to me daily, and I'm blessed to be able to work with you at AIM. And with that concludes today's Product Quest podcast. Please send any questions or comments or ideas for future shows to us at productquestpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Well, that was fun, Dan. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much very much.
Oh, that was very engaging, you guys. Really great questions and comments and so forth. That was a lot of fun.
I had my question number 1, number 2, number 3. I think that's how you're supposed to do an interview, right?